Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on meeting sustainability requirements for the European cocoa market. Today, we'll be discussing sustainability issues in the cocoa sector, requirements by European buyers, and how and why to improve your environmental, economical, and social sustainability, as well as the advantages and pitfalls when doing so. I am very excited about today, and I hope that you are too. I have seen that our attendees come from all over the world. We have seen subscriptions from the top 7 cocoa producing countries: Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Ecuador, Cameroon, Nigeria, Brazil, and Indonesia. And especially Nigeria is very well represented. Welcome to you all. But I'm also very happy, equally happy, with those representing the smaller cocoa producing countries. A lot of producers from and traders from Peru, India, Kenya, Liberia, Madagascar, Mauritius, Sierra Leone, Trinidad and Tobago, Zimbabwe, and many other countries are represented. Well, personally, I do think that meeting European sustainability requirements is a very important topic, and I'm very delighted to notice that there seems to be a global interest in this topic. My name is Tjalling de Boer. I am leading the research team for the cocoa and coffee sector on behalf of CBI, and today I am your moderator. Now, let's talk about the program of today. The main goals for today are to get you inspired and informed about working on your sustainability, to offer insights in the current demands by European buyers and how these will change in the coming years. And we will have special focus on the EUDR, the European Deforestation Regulation, to get an idea on where to start working on your sustainability and to learn about pitfalls and benefits when working on your sustainability. But before we get into that interesting content, we need to first explain something about GoToWebinar, which is the tool that we currently use for this session. Now, the tool is really simple, and you only have a few elements in your menu. The first thing is the audio pane, and if you do here as well, you don't need to do anything with that part of the menu. But if you do have audio problems, please consider changing your device. So switch from your phone to your laptop or the other way around, but only do so if you have trouble hearing us. Since we don't use any handouts, the next important option in your menu is the question pane, which is actually the most important part. Now you need to know that we cannot hear or see you, so you can wave at us, we won't notice. However, you do have the option to pose any questions in the field under questions, and I really invite you to do so. We don't have time to answer all of your questions, but we will try to answer as many questions as possible. Also, on the background, a team of CBI members is available to answer some of your questions, so please add your question in the questions pane. Now, the last thing I would like to mention is that during the webinar, we will be using using multiple polls. So during the webinar, we will interact with you by raising a question, which will pop up on your screen. Now, you can just click on the answer you prefer most, and well, that's it. Now, Simone, can you please introduce yourself and explain CBI to those unfamiliar to us?
Sure, thank you, Tjalling, and thank you to all the attendees joining our webinar today. Before I hand it over to the experts that we have talking to you in this webinar, I'd like to just take a couple of minutes to tell you a little bit about CBI, the organization hosting today's webinar. So I'm Simone Snoeijenbos. I am a program manager for the market intelligence in the cocoa sector at CBI. And CBI is the Center for the Promotion of Imports from Developing Countries. We are a governmental organization. We're part of the government of the Netherlands, and we receive our funding from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So what's our mission at CBI? We aim to support SMEs to strengthen their sustainability through their exports. And how do we do this? Primarily by offering practical solutions to the bottlenecks that many exporters, such as yourselves, experience when targeting international markets, and particularly the European one. One way that we do this is by creating value through generating knowledge and sharing it freely with SMEs and exporters such as yourself. And this is what we refer to as the market intelligence product of CBI. If we go to the next slide, Tjalling. So the market information is a very important tool that we have at CBI. If you stick around till the end of the webinar, I'll show you exactly how you can access it on our website. But what it primarily is research and information that we carry out and that we publish freely for you to access. It is particularly and specially created for aspiring SMEs from developing countries, whether that be in Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, the Middle East, or in Asia. And we cover multiple sectors that CBI is active in, primarily agricultural sectors, but also some consumer products and services, and of course, including cocoa. So when I talk about market information, what am I really referring to? What we have are market studies and tips that'll help you understand the European market. So what are the statistics? What does the demand look like? What are the current trends that you need to keep in mind? And that also provides you information about how to access this and how to enter the market. So we're talking about the requirements, how to find buyers, how to deal with European importers, and how to do business with them. And we publish all this information, as I mentioned, on our website in the form of studies and short and practical tips that you can access, as well as in webinars such as today's. So I hope you get the most out of it. I hope you enjoy it. And as I mentioned, if you stick around until the end, I'll show you how exactly you can access all this information. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Simone. Yeah. Now, as I mentioned before, Simone and I are not here alone. So most content will be shared by our panel of experts. Now, Ruben, Sebastiaan, Brice, please turn on your cameras. Can you please introduce yourself? Great, welcome. Ruben, could you please start introducing yourself?
Thank you, Chelling. Hi, everyone. I'm Ruben Bergsma. I'm one of the researchers on cocoa and coffee together with Chelling.
Sebastiaan, could you follow up?
Yes, thank you very much. Hi, everybody. My name is Sebastiaan van der Hoek. I work for Cargill. For those that don't know Cargill, Cargill is a global food corporation. We connect farmers with markets and customers with ingredients to make meals that people love. We're also a global buyer of cocoa and processor of chocolate and chocolate ingredients. I'm currently sustainability manager in Cargill's global impact team. And here I partner with business units across Cargill's Europe, Middle East and Africa organization to advance climate roadmaps with a specific focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from deforestation and other land-related emissions.
Thank you. How about you, Brice? Could you introduce yourself? Brice, you are currently muted still.
Hi everyone, happy to join me to this webinar. I'm Brice Lingock from Ivory Coast. I'm General Secretary of BARA. BARA is Union of Cooperative, 10 cooperative in Ivory Coast. We produce cocoa in Giglo, Jokwe, Toule Bleu, Bangolo, Gabiedi, San Pedro, Tabou, Bonon. We are also certified in Fair Trade, Rainforest, Bio, and we have something like 8,000 of farmers dealing this sustainability. We are very glad and happy to be here to share how we address this sustainability. Thank also CBI to join us for this webinar. Thank you.
No, thank you all. You're very welcome, and I'm very much looking forward to hear what you are going to tell us about the sustainability requirements. Now, that was the introduction. Let's start quickly with our first topic, which is the importance of addressing sustainability issues. Let's answer the question why it is so important to address these sustainability issues. But before our team answers that question, I am curious about your ideas, and I do have a question for you, which you should see currently popping up on your screen. And our question is, what is the most important sustainability issue in the cocoa market? Now, please select one of the answers you prefer most. Is that child labor, is that deforestation, or is it livelihood of farmers? I see some questions coming in, that's great. already over half voted, so that's good to notice. So please submit the answer you prefer best, and we will talk about that in a second. Now I give you a few more seconds to submit your answer. Okay, and there it is, the answers on the poll. Now, Ruben, our attendees have the feeling that a livelihood of farmers seems to be the most important sustainability issue. What do you think about that? I'm very curious about your ideas.
Yes, thank you, Challing. It's interesting to see these results. Of course, first of all, these topics are all important, and there are other relevant sustainability issues as well in the cocoa sector. I wanted to just give you a brief overview of those. I just have a few minutes for this, so I'm not going to go into great detail, but like Simona said, please stick around at the end and we can show you where you can find a lot more information about this. I'm happy to see that livelihood of farmers did get a large part of the response, because that is where a lot of this starts as well, where the solution starts as well. Again, they're all important, but at the core is farmer poverty. So addressing farmer poverty, that is what is needed to address the other issues as well. And my colleague Brice Lingock will talk about that later as well. So one of those issues is the lack of a living income among farmers. A living income is when a household has enough income to afford a decent standard of living for the people in that household. Many cocoa farmers are currently not receiving a living income for the cocoa that they produce. Another issue is child labor, which also got part of the response that we saw. Child labor is still persistent. Deforestation is also still happening. There are many drivers of deforestation worldwide, but in cocoa producing countries, cocoa is one of the main drivers of deforestation in many cases. We're also dealing with climate change. Everybody is worldwide. Cocoa farmers too, specifically. So in cocoa, that means droughts, changing rain patterns, heats, all things that influence how much cocoa you produce as a farmer. There are also farming practices. So for example, the use of cocoa waste or composting, pruning, using shade trees to protect the cocoa. So some of those farming practices can, help influence sustainability and also help with how productive the cocoa farm is. There's also pesticide use, which is often overused or not used properly in many places. This is also an issue that's related to health and safety of farmers and their children. Traceability is also traceability and transparency, a topic that's discussed a lot. Traceability is about knowing where your cocoa comes from. So speaking from a supply chain perspective, traceability is a tool to help with the issues that we're talking about. Traceability on its own, is of course not a solution to solve all those issues, but it's one of the tools that can help you solve these issues. But again, it all starts with farmer income.
Thank you very much, Ruben. Now, I thought that was a very clear answer, but if you do have questions for us, please add those to the question pane. So we will have some time in a few minutes to answer those questions that you have. So if you have any questions, please add those to the questions pane. Well, but before we answer your questions, I do have a question for you. And that is, why is it important to address sustainability issues? Do you think that is mostly because it increases business opportunities, because it benefits nature? Is that because it improves farming livelihood? Is that, well, you just need to stay in business in the long term, or is that just a tool to boost your buyer's reputation? What do you think? Please just submit your answer. Okay, I see that most people submitted their answer. I give you a few more seconds to provide an answer. Be closing the poll in 5 seconds. Okay, now as you can see that the answers are distributed among the first 4 answer possibilities. Now, Ruben, in your research, you mentioned some advantages for suppliers. Could you tell us a bit more about the benefits that you see based on your research?
Yes, thank you, Charling. It's interesting to see these responses a little bit more balanced among these, which I think makes sense because there are many benefits to this. So the question here is, why is it important to address these issues? Well, first of all, I believe that we have a moral obligation to do what's right for people and nature. So apart from it just being, in my opinion, the right thing to do, there are also a lot of tangible benefits to doing these things. So I think there are multiple layers to this. So first, there are the direct benefits for you as an exporter. There are also more indirect benefits for your suppliers, the farmers that you buy from, and for the buyers that you're selling to. We also have some farmer groups in this call, so that would also be more direct for you. And then even more indirectly, there's the benefits for the planet. So these are direct and indirect benefits, directly for you as a company, but then indirectly for your supply chain and the planet. So these benefits depend also, I think it's important to mention, on how these issues are addressed. It's very difficult to address these issues well. Many issues are still persistent, even though the sector has worked very hard on them for many years. But if they are addressed right, then there are social, environmental, and economic benefits. So economic will come in the next slides. On the social benefit side, so more indirectly, there's the benefit, if it's done right, of a higher farmer income. You can address child labor and gender inequality. There are health and safety benefits for on the social side for your supplies for the farmers and farmer groups that you buy from. And then more directly, there are the benefits of compliance. So compliance with the law, if you're exporting to the EU, local laws, bio requirements, market demands. We'll get into these a little bit later. On the environmental side, you help farmers adapt to climate change. You help track and prevent deforestation, which are more upstream benefits in your supply chain. Then more directly for you as an exporter, you can also help reduce your carbon footprints, which can help also then with your carbon claims. There are also carbon markets that might be possible to access, so access to extra finance, which should also benefit farmers. And again, on the compliance side, there are very important new regulations on the environmental side on compliance. And as was what was the most common response to the question, it's necessary to stay in business. It is also becoming the way to do business. So there are many benefits on this side that are much more direct that I think are really important as well. So it can help create new business opportunities. So you can now, for example, sell to buyers with specific sustainability requirements. If you are doing those sustainability things, it can help you access EU markets if things are needed for EU compliance. On the long-term relationship side, it can help you develop long-term relationships, more stable buyers and sellers, so more stable business and more long-term security. It can help with the reputation, your reputation in the market. So being strong on sustainability could lead to new business or larger volumes with your current buyers. It can help you lower risks as well. So knowing where your cocoa comes from, traceability and transparency, then addressing those issues, it lowers the risks of certain things happening in your supply chain. And it can also then be helpful with due diligence, which is becoming more and more important and also required. On the investment side, it could help you get more favorable loans for more sustainable cocoa, or help you get access to finance for specific projects, joining projects on sustainability as well.
Thank you very much, Ruben. Now, those are some very clear possible benefits that you could achieve by addressing sustainability. Now, Brice, Ruben pointed out some of these possible benefits. Now, your company has been working hard in the last few years to increase sustainability in your company. Which of those benefits did you actually achieve being a director of Agrimoa Cocoa Cooperative? Brice, you are muted.
Hello, thank you again, Charlie, for asking this important question. To answer this question, I will structure my answer maybe in something 3 or 4 avenues. I'm going to ask Ruben to speak about social aspect, economic aspect, environmental ones, and also I'm going to finish by governance. To speak about this benefit according social aspect, it's important to say that we fight poverty by supporting children. We bring school kits to children, supporting back to school for children, mainly for poor family by subsidies. Sometimes also we support the training of weeks 1. Children who have many problems at school, we bring them support. This is done because we are sustainable, we are certified in fair trade, rainforest, and in bio. We are also fighting diseases by bringing healthcare support to women, and to bring also building health center and equipment at this village and camp where we produce cocoa beans. According economic aspect, it's important to see that we improve our revenue because we are sustainable and we are produce cocoa in sustainable manner. Then it's important to see that we are sharing premium to our farmers. As we are certified, we receive at the end of our harvest a premium in fair trade, in rainforest, or also in bio. We are receiving this premium and we share it to our farmers. Also, it's important to say that because we are sustainable, we control our price in farm gate. All farmers receive a regulated price being by regulator we call here Conseil Café Cacao. Also, we are supporting diversification. Then we bring farmers some idea and support in poultry activities, fruit trees. We advise them to diversify the activity for them to be in good if price change. It's also important to see that we achieve cocoa product processing. In this, we have basically inside our cooperative, we can group women in this basically to help them to have income generating activities who can help them to support their daily life and empower them to have also a revenue. Also important to see that we have technical training to produce powder, soap, this kind of thing, so helpful for feed and sanitation. We also improve farmers' livelihood, training and supporting farmers to, as I said, to poultry, do small business to face daily life as we are cooperative, as we are again premium to help them to enhance and to improve their daily life. Concerning environmental aspect, it's important to see that as we are certified and as we are produce this sustainable cocoa, we do collection of polygon, waypoint mapping, shapefile to avoid to produce cocoa in protected area. It's also important to see that we are training farmers for better using of phytosanitary product and pesticide. Also, we train them to biodiversity protection, to have better using of water, soil fertilization. We help them to have a better understanding and a better manner to feed this cocoa with the phytosanitary product. We train also farmer on greenhouses gas. That is important for them to protect the environment by bringing them information and education on how to keep ozone layer by providing them improved homes. It's also important for them to have this information for them to protect environment. All this is possible because we have a system, our government system, who we are obliged to have a meeting and a board meeting every 2 months, and also to have every year a big assembly with all these farmers for us to have a better understanding for the grievance, for the complaint, for all the matter they are facing in this process. We also a moment for democracy where we can change our leaders, in our board is a moment of democracy. This government support us also to have a better manner to lead our cooperative. All this is possible because we are certified and because we do this sustainability. Thank you so much, Tidiane, for this question. Go back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brice. Now, thank you very much for your extensive answer. Yeah, I thought that was very interesting. Probably you have some questions. I already saw some questions coming in. Now, Simone, can you take the lead here about distributing those questions coming in?
Yeah, sure. So you're right, Charling. We've seen some questions come in from the audience. And I'd like to call on Ruben now, because you said it very clearly at the start. It all starts with a living income, and that seems to have triggered some questions. First and foremost, what exactly is a living income? Is there a specific number we're talking about, or does it look very different across regions? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, certainly. Thank you for that question. Yes, it differs region to region. There are also calculations for a living income. There are different organizations that have calculated a living income. Fair Trade is one source of one of those. They call it a living income reference price. So it's the price that a cocoa farmer should receive for their cocoa for them to earn a living income. Of course, it's important to remember there that households also have other sources of income. So they're not just earning money for their cocoa, but also for other sources of income. This makes the calculations very difficult because, first of all, it's very hard to generalize across households. All households are slightly different. So this can be very, very region specific or community specific or even household specific. So in most cases, you're working with averages across regions or countries, right? There's also the living income community of practice that has worked on calculating living incomes. That's an initiative of ISEAL, Sustainable Food Lab, and GIZ. The Voice Network has also published a position and with some calculations on this. There are also some companies that have used living income reference prices in their calculations. Are you able to hear me okay? I'm getting some notifications that my connection is not very good. Okay. So we can, I suppose we could provide those links and those sources if you're interested in seeing those. It's very hard to say this is the level for specific countries, but those calculations are there. And I think when you're using those living income calculations, what's important is that we don't need to get it perfect, because I don't think we ever will when there are so many differences. But at some point also it's good to start paying those living income reference prices, and in some cases that's happening. As to how many are currently receiving a living income, I think that's also very region specific and depends on the calculation that you use to make that calculation. I don't know if you would like to hand over to Brice Lingock to see if he wants to say something about living income in Côte d'Ivoire specifically, or would you like to move on to the next question?
Well, I think we can move on to the next question. Oh, Brice, would you like to step in about the living income in Côte d'Ivoire?
Yes, this is a question very important for us in Ivory Coast here, because the price we have in this moment can face our essential need. That is well known by every players and actors in this supply chain. We really need this price to up, to grow, to increase in order for us to face our education of children, to face as a livelihood, our practice to finance the training in farmers, in cooperative. The price we have in this moment can do all this. There's no mistake about this. I think that as a recommendation at this moment, I can also see that we really need also to have support to have a better price, and also if maybe we can increase this price by the market, that will be important. But if it's difficult, it's important to bring support to farmers. Thank you.
No, thank you. And perhaps a follow-up.
When I speak about this support, is a project, is a diversification activity, is income activity revenues, all this kind of support can be helpful.
Yeah, great. No, and indeed, I saw a question come in now about whether you have any, both of you, perhaps Ruben or Brice, examples of successful improvements and increases of living incomes that are being paid to farmers, perhaps on a level of a specific cooperative or on a country or region level.
Sorry, Brice, if I would like you to answer this question, but one thing thank you for mentioning diversification as well. I didn't say this clearly in my answer. Of course, there are many ways to improve the income of a farmer, and price is one very important part of that, but it's not the only way to do that. There's also diversification and other things. So important to keep that in mind as well. There are many variables to go into it, price being a very important one of that. And Brice, do you have any specific examples that you could talk about?
For me, we don't have in this moment. For me, we don't have in this moment a very highlight example experience we can focus about a farmer's transformation. When you go in our village, our camp, to see a farmer who can really tell you that he wants to continue to produce cocoa, is very difficult. It's very difficult to find this farmer. And as I say, we really need this support farmers, help them to diversify their activities, and to bring in to cover this cocoa activity with other activity. We can help them to have more income. And then also we think about something like carbon credit. It can also be so helpful, and also to educate and train these farmers in order for them to gather something like a advocacy to advocate concerning their right. Maybe we can have change at this moment when they will be more informed about what they don't have and one they have to give them and what they don't have.
Clear. I do see some more questions, but I believe we'll be answering them as we move into the other blocks. So I'll keep them in my back pocket and I'll get back to you both later. Back to you, Charlie.
Okay, thank you very much, Simona. Now let's dive into our next topic, which is the European sustainability demands. Ruben, again, you dived into that legislation. Can you explain a bit more about the requirements by European buyers?
Yes, thank you, Charlie. Sorry, just one moment. Yes, so there are many requirements that are relevant here. Again, read our research for the full details. I'm just going to focus on the most important ones. First, I will talk about the mandatory requirements, and then I will talk about voluntary requirements. So I'll start with the EU Green Deal, which is agreements to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions within the EU, so by 55% by 2030, and then no net emissions by 2050. So this includes many renewable energy targets, things about carbon removals, global climate action. So this results in many different actions that will be taken. We actually also have a study specifically on the EU Green Deal and cocoa, but that describes this as well. There are actions that come out of this specifically for cocoa. One of those is the EU deforestation regulation. So this is a regulation on deforestation-free products. It's for several different products. One of those is cocoa. In short, it means that no cocoa can be imported into the EU from lands that was deforested after December 31st, 2020. And it starts next year in December 30, 2024. And there's a lot more nuance to those details, and Sebastiaan will talk about this much more in detail. So I will leave it there. But that's a very important one that's coming up. Then there's also the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which means that companies have to report and take action to prevent negative impacts on human rights and environment, so social and environmental. That's about the company's operations, also their subsidiaries, and upstream and downstream value chains. Applies to companies based on their turnover. And a climate transition plan is needed for that as well. Starts in 2026 or 2027, depending on the size of the company, so depending on the turnover. Some things are also still being finalized, I believe, some final details. But this will have impact on cocoa. It will also mostly have impact on most of the trade coming from Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana. Would likely need to be compliant with the due diligence obligations. Then the last one I wanted to talk about for the mandatory requirements is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. That's more about the reporting on sustainability, on social and environmental risks. That is specifically for EU companies. I know we have a lot of people from producing countries in this webinar. So how is this relevant? It could be relevant for your buyers, as with the other ones as well. So in 2025, companies have to report on this based on their 2024 financial year. It strengthens existing rules, so there were already some rules around this in existence. It strengthens those. Exporters outside the EU do not need to report, but your buyers again might need extra information for this. So those are all relevant mandatory requirements for you. Then more on the voluntary side, there are several industry standards that could be relevant for you. So buyers might need to be compliant with those EU requirements that I just talked about. There are also other standards and things to consider. One of those could be certification, so rainforest alliance or fair trade or organic. Your buyers might need cocoa that is certified through one of those certification programs. Many of the larger buyers also have a supplier code of conduct that they ask their suppliers to comply with. So you have to meet the things that are mentioned in that supplier code of conduct. Those can usually be found on the company website as well. There are also companies that have their own company sustainability programs or specific commitments. So they need to also show improvements and meet those commitments and ask for things that meet the requirements in their programs. So those are often very company specific. Then that's just a very quick overview. I wanted to talk about a few things that maybe can support you with this as well. These may not all be relevant for exporters, but I think it's important to mention that because it shows that there is support with this, apart from reading the CBI reports, of course. And it could be valuable to look into these as well for information and inspiration. There's the Global Reporting Initiative, for example. It shows best practice for how organizations can talk about sustainability and show accountability for impact. So it's how you report on impact. There's the Science-Based Target Initiative. We talked about carbon footprint and climate earlier, so that's very relevant. It helps companies set science-based emissions reductions targets. So that's a lot of words for how to reduce your carbon footprints, your carbon impact. There's the Carbon Disclosure Project, which runs the global environmental disclosure system. They score companies on their performance, so you can see how well companies are doing. And there's the Accountability Framework Initiative, which is a roadmap for achieving ethical supply chains. So these are good guidelines for companies to use and how to work on ethical supply chains. I think those could be interesting resources for you to look into as well for compliance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruben. Now, thank you very much for giving that profound overview without going too deeply into those different directives. Well, beforehand, we received a lot of questions about the deforestation regulation. Sebastiaan, could you please dive a bit deeper into this topic?
Yes, thanks. I'm happy to. And also let me know, Challing, if you want me to take over control of the slides.
I'm trying to work on that.
But indeed, the EU deforestation regulation is top of mind for the cocoa industry and for Cargill. One important reason for that is that it's maybe slightly different from some of the EU regulations that Ruben talked to, in the sense that the EU deforestation regulation entails a generic market prohibition unless companies prove compliance with the criteria laid down in this regulation. And I'll talk quickly about how at Cargill we interpret the regulation. And later in the webinar, I will talk a little bit more about how we have been working to move our global cocoa supply chains towards compliance with the EU deforestation regulation. And we will also touch on some of the challenges and learnings that we have come come to appreciate along this journey. So cocoa is recognized as one of the important drivers of deforestation alongside a number of other products and commodities. The European Parliament has ratified legislation aiming to eliminate products linked to deforestation from the union market. And at Cargill, we generally support the objective and the ambition of the Commission to address deforestation linked to commodity production. According to the legislation, cocoa can only be placed on the union market when it's considered deforestation free, with a cutoff date of 31st December 2020, meaning that cocoa that is produced on lands that were deforested after that date could not be imported onto the EU. Operators, the likes of Cargill, that are importing products to the union market, need to apply due diligence through collecting information, documents, and data demonstrating that the products that we import comply. And EU member states designate respective competent authorities that will enforce this legislation. So diving a little bit deeper in the contents of this legislation, and this slide definitely doesn't do value to the elaborate legislation text, which I definitely would recommend all of you on the call to take a close look at. But here I've digested a number of the key components. We already talked a little bit about the objective of this law, but the EU wants to lead the effort globally to fight deforestation, and feels that by avoiding the placement of products linked to deforestation on the market can give a signal to markets globally. The definition of deforestation follows the FAO definition. The cutoff date is a crucial component of the law. We already talked about it briefly. The cutoff date is 31st of December, meaning that any lands that were deforested after this date cannot produce products for import on the union market. And the EU legislation is talking not only about illegal deforestation, but also about legal deforestation. We know that in some countries, national legislation recognizes legal options for deforestation, but this is not recognized in the EU legislation. And cocoa is not the only commodity or product in scope. Cocoa derivative products also are in scope of the legislation, as are soy, palm, coffee, wood, rubber, etc. Producing countries will be classified according to risk. This doesn't change much in the requirements that operators need to abide to necessarily, but it does change the way in which supply chains are scrutinized. So if products in a supply chain come from a relative high-risk country, competent authorities may increase the intensity of controls. Then a little bit more about the due diligence process that operators are subject to. Operators need to issue a due diligence statement that acts as a proof of compliance with the regulation. The EU will gear up systems that allow operators to submit such a statement, and that statement needs to be backed by information that shows compliance. A key component of that information that operators like Cargill and others need to supply as part of the due diligence statement is geolocation information that represent the plots of land of production at the heart of the batch of import. Geolocation can be GPS points or polygon data, depending on the farm that one is seeking to represent. On top of supplying information that signifies where your products are coming from. Operators need to demonstrate that they're addressing risks, for example, risks of compliant products to be mixed with non-compliant products. And competent authorities may have the power to suspend imports or issue penalties and fines to operators that are not complying with the law, with up to 4% of the annual turnover of the operator, and that's a significant penalty, as you may understand. The regulation text is final. And the law went into force. Now operators have 18 months to transition and begin to prove their compliance close to the end of the 2024 calendar year. Later we'll talk a little bit more about how we as Cargill are getting ready. But first I'll give the word to Challing again.
Thank you very much, Sebastiaan. Now, Ruben and Sebastiaan have both provided an overview of what the requirements entail. Now let's talk a bit about you as an exporter and how you could meet those high standards. But first, I do have a question for you, and that is the following. How important is sustainability for your company? Is it not important? Is it that you just started working on sustainability? Is it that you have been working on sustainability for many years? Or could you say that your products are completely sustainable? Please submit your answer. Please just click on the answer you prefer best. Okay, I see that most people voted already, so that's great to see. I'll give you a few more seconds. Okay, now it seems that most companies have already been working on sustainability for many years, almost 60%. So that is a great thing to notice. Well, thank you all for that answer. I think that is very clarifying. Also to see a bit on where you are in the process. Of course, that is very general. Now let's get back to you, Sebastiaan. You just explained a lot of information about what these requirements are. Now, how would you start implementing the EUDR as a supplier, and which difficulties do suppliers face when meeting those requirements?
Yeah, thanks, Challing. I can definitely talk a little bit more about the journey that we have been on for a couple of years now to address deforestation in the cocoa supply chain. Not necessarily because we understood that the EU was coming up with new regulation, but first and foremost because many of our clients for years already have been asking us to work with them on addressing deforestation in the cocoa supply chain. So all of the work that I'm presenting now is part of the last couple of years of joint collaborative work together with our clients. When we think about addressing deforestation in the cocoa supply chain, and this is also coming back centrally in the EUDR, there are a number of connected but bespoke interventions and practices that we promote. So first and foremost, it's very important to understand where our cocoa beans are coming from, and we're deploying digital first mile traceability solutions to facilitate visibility on where cocoa is coming from. We leverage GPS polygon mapping capabilities to document in digital the parameters of the farms that are part of our supply chain networks, so that we can understand the size of their farm and the farm's proximity to forests and other environmental features, for example. We combine our traceability data from our digital first mile traceability systems, as well as the polygons, to then overlay this information with public available forest monitoring data. But we also work with more bespoke commercial service providers in the forest monitoring technology space. Let's talk a little bit more about digital first mile traceability and traceability in general. In Cargill, and this is not unique for Cargill, but works for many of cocoa buyers globally. We identify and recognize roughly 5 distinct cocoa origination models. On the very left hand is where we do business directly with farmer cooperatives. This is where we have good visibility on the farmers that supply our cocoa. Cooperatives generally administer their member base very well, and we work with cooperatives to digitize this administration. Visibility on where our cocoa is coming from is diluted as we move gradually to the right, where we may do business with middlemen, domestic exporters that have their own bespoke networks and supply chains. And unless these networks are documented by these exporters, we have limited opportunities to understand where cocoa is coming from, and visibility is diluted even more to the right, where we might do business with international trade holders or sometimes our competitors, and on the most right end, the terminal exchange. Now, the large majority of the cocoa that we buy is coming from the left-hand sourcing model, where we do direct business with cooperatives. And yeah, it's very important, I think, to understand that if we want to get a full-fledged understanding of where our cocoa is coming from and address deforestation in the cocoa supply chain, we need to gain greater transparency and visibility with supply chain actors more on the right hand, and collaboration is key there. National traceability systems will be very critical in achieving that necessary visibility. Some people ask us, why don't you only source cocoa from cooperatives? Well, the answer is quite simple. In some countries, Cargill by law is mandated to buy a percentage of cocoa through domestic exporters to stimulate local economies, and we obviously support that. So this is one of the reasons why we wouldn't necessarily pick one of these origination models, and we believe it's imperative to collaborate with cocoa supply chain actors across the globe to transform towards sustainability. A little bit more about how this digital first mile traceability works. In this case, I'm talking about Ivory Coast. So I already talked a little bit about GPS polygon mapping. It really starts with the farm. So we will collect data of the farm, and we will document in digital the perimeter of the farm using a GPS polygon. The polygon comes with a unique ID. The farmer comes with a unique ID. And when the farmer is bringing a cocoa bag to the cooperative, it's labeled with a barcode tag. That barcode tag is scanned to administer a digital record, and that digital record captures the volume that the farmer is delivering, but also the unique ID, which connects back to the polygon. And this is how we create a first mile digital transaction that connects the bean delivery to the polygon. The bags then accumulate in a warehouse. You can imagine that we're scanning all the labels such that we have an administration of which bags come into our warehouse. The cocoa then is moved to a truck. The truck has a unique ID the truck moves the cocoa in the container to export, and our export vessels as well as the container carry unique IDs, and this is how we establish a traceability chain up to export and beyond. But this is obviously more difficult to do when we do business with some of these other suppliers, and it's really important that these other suppliers are equipped with the necessary technologies, and also that the technologies that are currently available in the cocoa industry can talk to each other and can be compared. And again, nationally governed systems play a very important role there. Polygon mapping, we talked about it already. We have been mapping a significant amount of farms across our global supply chains, and we continue to do so. This is a very resource-intensive effort, and this is mainly so because farms change dynamically over time. It's quite difficult to capture the dynamic smallholder farming reality in data. Another challenge that we see is that not only farming landscapes change over time, but also supply chains change over time. So a farmer may do business with a cooperative that supplies to Cargill in the one year, but might do business with another cooperative that supplies our competitor in the other year. Both our companies will be inclined to map those farms, and this leads to a lot of duplicate effort. So how can we work collaboratively also at the national level to ensure that farmers are administered, that land documentation is available, including the polygon, that industry can tap into? That's one of the most significant questions and learnings that is arising from more private sector-led mapping efforts. Lastly, I want to talk about forest monitoring. When we capture polygons, we can overlay these polygons with digital data about forests and where forests are changing. A lot of very good public data is available, for example, in the Global Forest Watch. And we can use that to see if forests in proximity to the farms that we map have changed recently. In this case, all farms operate nicely outside the boundaries of what was a primary forest in 2001. But we can see on the right hand incidences of forest loss happening gradually from 2001 to 2019. Now, we haven't mapped farms on this land, suggesting that this may not be for cocoa, but doesn't mean that if we didn't map a farm, no cocoa-related deforestation is happening here. How to understand what's happening on the ground is not so easy actually from a desk looking into satellite imagery. When we go to these places, this is what we find. And my question to you is, and I'm asking this question also quite often to EU policymakers and our clients, is what we see here deforestation? And more importantly, if we all agree on this call that this is deforestation and the farmer is not compliant with the EU deforestation regulation, what do we do next? I think we opened up a poll to test the audience and see if you feel that what you see on the picture here is deforestation or not. I'm curious to learn what you are thinking.
So I'm not sure if you can see the results, Sebastiaan, but it seems like we've closed the poll. And unsurprisingly, the majority of people are not sure and answered, I don't know. And we seem to have a pretty close tie to yes and no. What do you think about that?
Okay, interesting. So frankly, I studied forest conservation, and I also have difficulties with interpreting this picture. And when I talked to the field agents that went here, they heard out stories of people that were working on the land, were living close to the land, and they told us many stories. They told us about indeed how they're interested to start farming this area for cocoa, and that they have been starting to remove some trees to have more light penetrate the area. At the same time, they also told us they're hesitant to start planting cocoa because they are confronted with illegal logging gangs that visit the area frequently to pull out large timber. And there is a very important risk there that young cocoa saplings are destroyed by the logging of large commercially valuable trees. The farmers also told us that they're not formally owning this land. The land belongs to a landowner that sits in Abidjan. So you can begin to understand that this context here is quite complex and definitely not binary. I think we can't easily tell this from the satellites. And actually, when you realize the context on the ground, it's very difficult for a company like Cargill to draw a conclusion as to whether this is compliant or not. And if we would assume that this is a situation that is not compliant with the EU deforestation legislation, we also are unsure how to engage next. On the one hand, we might tell the farmers in this area that this land can never produce cocoa to be imported to the union market, but that doesn't mean the farmer will not continue to consider producing cocoa on this land and find another way to access markets. So maybe it's actually in our interest to continue and engage this farmer in perhaps restoring this plot in a cocoa agroforestry setting. And this is something that that we're discussing a lot with our clients and our implementation partners and also our suppliers. So to conclude, we feel that the EU deforestation legislation is a step in the right direction to show a market signal that consumers in Europe no longer want to consume chocolate that is a driver of deforestation. At the same time, we feel that the legislation needs to be proportionate and not unnecessary punitive, especially not for small farmers. The law also needs to be implementable and it needs to be adapted to the realities of different supply chains. Some supply chains have more matured than others. Some supply chains include more smallholders than others. And first and foremost, we need to collaborate to achieve the impacts that this law seeks to achieve. We're talking about stopping deforestation. Ultimately, to stop deforestation, we need towards protection and conservation of forests. And this happens at the forest frontier, where there is a risk of agricultural expansion into forest. So collaboration is key. Thanks, and I'm happy to answer any questions that may be out there in the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Sebastiaan. And indeed, I think that is a nice bridge to our next part, the Q&A number 2. Simone, could you take over, please?
Sure, because there certainly have been some questions, especially related to the nuance that you were highlighting, Sebastiaan, where it's not always so clear. We had one audience member now saying that indeed the question is hard to answer, and it also depends on the kind of forest coverage that was there in the first place. Are we talking about primary forest, secondary forest? At the end, the idea of forest preservation is also a matter of biodiversity conservation and ecological functionality. This is just a comment that we received after your statement. What do you think?
No, I think the question about what is a forest has been raised a lot of times over the past months in the face of the EUDR, but that discussion has been raging on for years. And what a forest is in the eye of the beholder. I think that's the only question I can give. But we in Europe may look very differently at forest than a farmer in West Africa. And I think what is quite challenging in the face of the EUDR is that ideally, and to set the playing field, we need to reach a common definition and a common reference. And this is not easy. The EU has promised to come up with a forest base layer for 31st of December 2020 for the world, and especially the tropics, such that actors that need to implement on this law can begin to assess whether their supply chain operates in proximity of these forests and take the necessary measures. At the same time, the EU has said that this map that they will publish will not hold legal value. So a lot of supply chain actors are still wondering, what reference do I need to use to prove compliance? And that answer is not very clear.
Yes, indeed. And it seems the question is also here in our audience. So you mentioned, of course, that different cultures have different interpretations of what a forest is, and not to keep bugging you with difficult questions, but what about traditional shifting techniques for agriculture? How do you think these would fall under deforestation?
Yeah, a very good question, and the EU legislation text and in the definitions of forest and deforestation have made great strides to document some of those nuances. So one concern was revolving, especially in cocoa, around whether cocoa agroforestry could still be considered compliant. Now, the legislation talks about lands predominantly under agricultural use that may have trees on them. These would not be considered forests. So if one is operating an agroforest today and it wasn't a forest before December 2020, that would not be a problem. Of course, farmers considering to transform a forest into an agroforest today, that would be considered deforestation. Shifting agriculture, I think, is still a bit of a tricky one. I think you're thinking about regenerating forests after lands have been left to fallow, whether they would fall under the definition. I think, but I don't pin me down on it, these lands would be considered predominantly under agricultural use. But there we get into a very difficult, nuanced conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
Maybe, yeah, the even more challenging part is how do you monitor this from the satellite? A satellite cannot identify predominant agricultural use. A satellite can identify trees and lands with no trees. So that will be a very difficult one to resolve for.
Yes, absolutely. No, I was just about to say, I read somewhere once that, yeah, shifting shouldn't be seen as deforestation, but as forest modification, right? So it's just kind of like this nuance where it's not clear whether it's one or the other. We had one question as well about Global Forest Watch, stating that it only looks at tree cover loss, which is not considered deforestation under EUDR. So how would this work for tracking?
Yeah, Global Forest Watch is a really powerful tool as it brings together many different public data sets that document the state of forests. Those data sets are peer reviewed and typically globally consistent. And that makes those data sets very powerful. Indeed, one of those data sets is global tree cover loss. Tree cover loss is not always deforestation. You may find loss of trees, for example, loss of rubber trees or loss of palm trees. That obviously doesn't constitute deforestation. So it's definitely maybe not the most ideal data set, but it is out there, and I would definitely encourage those to use it. At Cargill, we are also looking at tree cover loss on primary forests. There's also a data set on tropical primary forest available in Global Forest Watch. And if you filter tree cover loss that is occurring on primary forest, that may serve as another proxy and maybe a conservative, but a stronger proxy for critical deforestation. So this is maybe a way to leverage the resources of the Global Forest Watch to start monitoring your compliance.
Super, thank you. And talking about powerful tools, blockchain has been mentioned quite often in supply chain traceability and in verification of these kind of things. Are there any ongoing initiatives at Cargill or intentions to work with blockchain in relation to the deforestation regulation?
Yeah, and we have been looking into blockchain. We also work with other technology partners that help us facilitate to administer those transactions. Ultimately, it's really about documenting and digitizing those transactions and linking them across different steps in the supply chain. Blockchain is sort of envisioned to do that in a simple and harmonized way, but also other technologies can help us to realize that.
Sure, thank you, Sebastiaan. And taking a step back from the deforestation regulation, because of course we're discussing sustainability at large, I'd like to maybe ask Ruben to come back for some questions we received earlier on in the webinar. Hi, there you are. So we did have one question about how the sustainability challenges in the cocoa sector vary in the different cocoa producing regions. Do you see that some of these issues play a larger role in some countries than in others?
Yeah, it's a very good question. That's very difficult to answer because you don't want to generalize across entire countries or regions. I think most of the issues are issues in most parts of the world. Cocoa is a tropical product, so of course, yeah, tropical forest deforestation is a big issue everywhere. But there it also depends on whether and when the forest has already been cut. There are countries that have a lot more primary forests left that are, of course, in higher risk for deforestation of primary forests. Child labor is an issue that's most often discussed in the context of West Africa, which is not to say it's not an issue elsewhere. I think a good resource for these kinds of things is Fair Trade and Rainforest Alliance have published risk maps for different issues, for child labor, forced labor, and some other topics as well, on a country level. That's based on external data, and these are maybe risk bases, which is not to say that something is a bigger or smaller problem somewhere necessarily, but yeah, similar to what Sebastiaan described with the EU, the risk might be higher, so you need more due diligence there, which doesn't mean that it's happening there, but it's just good to pay extra attention. I find it difficult to be more specific than that. I mean, climate change is affecting everyone globally. Cocoa farmers everywhere too, changing rain patterns. We've heard that a lot in West Africa the last months as well, with production volumes being adjusted also due to changing weather patterns. But that's probably also happening in other regions. Maybe, yeah, that's what I would like to say about that. I don't know if you want to throw it to any of the other panelists about that.
No, I think that's clear. And of course, we don't want to generalize. And I think many of these sustainability issues are present across the board. One thing that one of the attendees flagged, perhaps not so much a sustainability issue, but something that does affect the economic sustainability of the industry in the long run, is the lack of young farmers in some regions. So even perhaps in some Latin American countries where farmer income is not that low, we do see that the average age is even up to 60, and young people are simply not that attracted to the industry. Anything we can say about what impact this may have in the longer run?
Well, again, I can talk about like a global macroeconomic perspective on this. I think for the specific aging of the farmers, maybe Brice can also talk about that. But yeah, it's an issue that you hear in various countries around the world. If the young farmers don't go into cocoa, and if these older farmers stop farming cocoa, then that could in theory mean drop in supply because there's less cocoa entering the markets. Basic economic theory would say less supply, greater demand means the price goes up. But yeah, it's not always that simple, and the farmer price is not necessarily the same as the global market prices. There's farm gate prices that are more regulated as well, so it's not quite as simple as that. But in theory, reduced supply would raise the price. But yeah, supply management is also a topic that's been discussed in cocoa. That's a very, very difficult one to tackle. I don't know.
Perhaps Brice, if you're still on the line, how do you see it? How are young farmers engaged in Côte d'Ivoire? How does the industry look at this?
First of all, it's important to say that the CCC regulator system has start to register all the plots of farmers in Côte d'Ivoire to address this concern. But I really think that we have to join our forces to address this deforestation question, to tackle very well this concern. As what I can say at this level of our sharing. We have many issues concerning deforestation in Ivory Coast, and we do what we can in order to address it, starting by mapping, waypoint, shapefile, geolocalization, looking for other human resources to address all this. Is a core question for us to do this in order to sell cocoa in Europe. As Sebastiaan speak about regulation, if you don't do that, you can sell your cocoa in Europe. Or at this moment, all cooperative precisely our own cooperative and union of cooperative, we do all we can in order to align our production in this regulation. We do that, and we really hope that it's important for the market to support cooperative and farmers to upgrade and to protect all this area. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And keeping an eye on the time, I think we'll just have time for one last question before we start wrapping it up. So you actually just mentioned cooperation, Brice, and this is a question we received on that same topic for Sebastiaan. We have an audience member saying, interesting what you said about combining forces on the mapping and getting the data in for different users in the chain. How do you go about it? What's the plan? Have you noticed that others are open to working together in this manner? And do you think there will be one system at the end to show traceability data to EU customs?
Thanks. Yeah, very good question. And yes, we are advocating for that one system, or maybe maybe more at the producer country level at least. We've seen, and I think Brice mentioned that we've seen the governments of Ghana and the governments of Ivory Coast take initial steps to begin to gear up nationally governed traceability systems, sometimes inspired by pioneering private sector actors in this space. And those initial steps are promising and need to be accelerated and resourced to come into fruition as we're close to being faced with the entry into force. That's on traceability. On administration of land, there are some very inspiring initiatives. One example is the Côte d'Ivoire Land Partnership, CLAP, which is an initiative stood up by a coalition of cocoa industry players, the GIZ and a company called Meridia. They're also in the Netherlands. Cargill is also a supporting member of the coalition to promote land documentation and digitization of land documentation in cocoa farming contexts. To make sure that we all refer to the same farms and farmers with a unique ID, to make sure that everyone agrees on the boundary extents and to ensure conflicts around property rights are resolved. Initiatives like these are very crucial to become more efficient.
Absolutely, thank you. So with that in mind, I'd like to hand it back to our host. Yes, Tjalling, there you are.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, as you said before, Simone, unfortunately, we don't have the time to address all of your questions. Now, I would like to shortly close off with some final but very important recommendations from our experts. Now, Ruben, Sebastiaan, and Brice, could you please turn on your camera? I am wondering about your final recommendations. Sebastiaan, could you start, please?
Yeah, I would say that through our market research at Cargill, we've seen a significant increase in the awareness about sustainability among consumers in Europe, and many consumers that took part in our surveys actually indicate their willingness to pay more for a sustainably produced chocolate product. So when consumers refer to sustainability, they're particularly mentioning the way cocoa was produced. That's what they're interested in. Now we've just learned about all the initiatives that are being stood up by institutions and coalitions. And at the heart of all these initiatives sits the need to understand where products are coming from, where cocoa is coming from. So for those on the call that are working on producing or exporting cocoa, in order to have that competitive advantage, I would recommend do work on the administration of where the products that you originate and that you export are coming from and the conditions under which they were produced.
Okay, that's very clear. Thank you very much, Sebastiaan. Now, Ruben, could you please follow up?
Yes, thanks, Tjalling. Yeah, my recommendation would be built on something that's come up several times in this webinar, which is the importance of combining forces, working together. So that's working with farmers and farmer groups, all the stakeholders in cocoa, government, industry, NGOs, other stakeholders. Sharing data, sharing knowledge, working together on impact. See if there are places where you don't need to compete on sustainability, but actually work together on achieving more impact. And like Sebastiaan today, being very generous with his knowledge, sharing what they do, working examples of working together. Brice Lingock too, talking about supporting farmers working together. I think that's crucial here. So that would be my recommendation, highlighting the importance of combining forces.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that would be very beneficial for both the sector and individual companies. Well, Brice, what would your final recommendation be?
And as I say, my final recommendation, as I said earlier, and Ruben mentioned it again, is very important to bring this support to farmer. And as we know, only increasing price can address all these issues in cocoa sector. It's also important to increase this price, but also to support them to do diversification, to see how Creative Carbon can also support them, to bring them training and education for them to advocate for their right. I think that with this support, we can arrive to get this decent price. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brice. Now, Simona, I'm wondering about your final recommendation.
Thank you, Chelling. And well, my recommendation to all of you would be to make use of the CBI market information, to consult our studies, consult our website, and use this type of information to get a better understanding of the European market, of the requirements, and to stay up to date on practical tips. So I promised I would show you how you can consult this information. So I mentioned at the start, our website is cbi.eu. If you go to this website, you'll notice that market information is here at the very top. And entering it, you will have access to the information we have on the sectors that CBI is active in. One of the first ones at the top is cocoa and cocoa products, because we don't just look at cocoa, but we also look at semi-finished products and other derivatives that can be exported. And as I mentioned at the start, we publish different types of studies. So you have access to the sector studies, which give you information about the demand, about the trends currently in the market, and what opportunities these may offer, as well as the requirements that you need to comply with. Some of the ones we discussed today, but some of the other basic ones as well. As I mentioned, we don't just look at cocoa as one sector, but also delve into specific products. If you are looking at exporting certified cocoa, organic cocoa, or for example, semi-finished products, because you're already able to do some processing in your country before exporting, you can also consult these studies to see specific information about the market for these products, as well as the requirements to enter the European market. Finally, we have some tip studies. These are a bit shorter, a bit more practical, to give you some more information on how to find buyers, how to do business. I noticed a lot of the questions today were also simply about how to get started exporting to Europe. So these provide some practical, let's say, first actions to get you started on your exporting journey. If you have a specific market in mind, you can also enter our country studies to learn a little bit more about how these markets differ from each other. There are a lot of similarities, of course, across Europe and the EU as one market, but you'll notice that consumers and specific buyer requirements can differ a bit between, say, Germany, Italy, or Belgium. And finally, in addition to all these studies, as you notice today, we do have webinars. Today's webinar, as well as all the other ones that we've done, are published on our YouTube channel, so you can access these, have a look, learn more about all this information. And finally, to stay up to date, you can also subscribe to our newsletter. This is the button you can subscribe specifically for cocoa, so you don't have to bother with the information about other sectors, and simply stay up to date on new studies or new webinars that we're working on. Back to you, Chelling.
Okay, thank you very much, Simona. Now, also thanks to you experts. I thought the information provided to us today was great, and most of all, of course, thanks to you, our attendees. Thanks for joining us, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.